Hello and welcome to another episode of the Bazaar Over Explained, and we are looking at some new items here for the upcoming Season 2 patch of the Bazaar. Full credit to the people who spoiled these items or previewed these items, however you want to say it here. We'll see a couple of their names and I'll link down to everyone's channel below. But first and foremost, you see Kriparian here himself giving us some new Pygmalion items for Season 2. And let's jump into it and see what these items look like. Now, I haven't really listened to a lot of the takes of people who've talked about these, and I'm trying to give my own original feedback here on what these are looking like. So starting with 28-hour fitness. It is a large property item, says when you use a weapon, your items with shield gain plus 10 shield for the fight, and when you use a shield item, your weapons gain plus 10 damage for the fight. I think this is going to be a pretty decent, if not good, Pygmalion item. I don't know if it's going to be one that you're necessarily going to use to scale into the late game, but there was kind of a problem in Pygmalion where the character had so many different small items that didn't really do a lot. They needed a lot of other items to enable them. I'm thinking of something like the Halidai, or even to Kukri to some example, as is a pretty good example. Something where you need another item to ensure that it is good, scaling its damage or something of the nature. So having something on board to kind of help with that, I mean, it doesn't really solve the problem that, again, you need another item to help make your items good, but this one can at least make all of them viable. And it's interesting in that it's really incentivizing you to use weapons and shield items. I think with that, we can look at some good combos with this. So pulling up Bazaar.gg, I just am first thinking of the robe, which has a pretty low cooldown. When you use an adjacent item, you charge this 1 second, and I think that works really well with something like a yo-yo. So you could, have the robe going off, go the yo-yo going off, and then if you had this 28-hour fitness, I think that makes a lot of sense. We can also look at something like Tusked Helm, which with 28-hour fitness means that every time it goes off, it would essentially be charging itself by, 10. I imagine it scales 20, 30 from there in terms of damage. So probably with every time the Tusked Helm goes off, you're going to get 10 damage and 10 shielding on it, so it's going to go off another time, and then that second iteration of it, because it has multicast, has already gotten the benefit from it. So your Tusked Helm at, let's say, bronze tier is going to do 20, and then it's going to do 40. So that's pretty good on a 10-second cooldown. I think especially that 28-hour fitness starts at silver tier. I think that it could be pretty good. It could even go into a lot of builds, and I'm thinking specifically like a Jubalian drum build or a Pig's Gym build. The thing about Jubalian drum is it is a single item that enables kind of a single play style, which is kind of why I entitle it the drum build, meaning that it is an item without this Jabalian drum on your board, and with all the items that to support it, your build is just way weaker and doesn't make a lot of sense. It's kind of like a go wide weapons build. But now with the 28-hour fitness, when we're using our yo-yo, when we're using our atlatl, I can never spell this correctly, atlatl, there you go. When we're using something like our atlatl, we could also put that next to something like a robe, or even something like jewelry, which has a 4 second cooldown. These items start to make a lot more sense. So I think that this is going to be pretty good. I don't know, again, that it's going to be a hyper late game item, but that's kind of the problem where Pig is at right now, is he doesn't have a lot of items to really help him out in the, I want to say, like early to mid game. It's really Ganjo, Waits, and apropos chapeau to some degree. You still need to kind of enable all of those somehow. So just having another item that enables Pig's other items to make sense seems pretty good. So I do like this 28-hour fitness item, and yeah, I'm excited to play with that one. The next one we have here is Bad Blocker. So it is an 8 second cooldown, shield 20 item, and it has +1 multicast for each item you have in play with value over 10. So here's an interesting thing about the Bad Blocker, is when it says it has +1 multicast for each item you have in play with value over 10, generally, currently in the meta, we are either going to get that through having a large property, where it is naturally going to have over 10 in its value, or we're going to have to value stack something else. And value stacking multiple items doesn't really make a lot of sense if it's on Pygmalion, especially if it's not going to already be on your large item. We'll see another item that works very well with this, but in a vacuum, this item doesn't look too powerful to me. I did watch the Kriparian video, I will say, and heard him talk about the tech and apparel tags on this being pretty good, and I do agree with that, although the cargo shorts themselves is probably what you would want that for, like a beast of burden, and the cargo shorts already are apparel, but that's its own other thing. I think that is a pretty good thing to note, is that it just has these two types on it. But I think that this item in a vacuum is not that good, but we'll see with some other items. This one I think is actually going to be pretty potent, but that's just my take on it. It's really this 8-second cooldown that I dislike the most. Having an 8-second cooldown shield item on Pygmalion is not very good, in my opinion. I think about something like, let's see, like a fixer-upper, which has a 4-second cooldown. Again, we looked at the robe, which has, 7, but at a bronze tier, but has 4-second at diamond, and you're charging it every second. I think about something like the land scraper, which has a 7-second cooldown. It's going to be shielding for way more inherently. Again, the land scraper is going to be inherently shielding for 200, and the bad blocker is only shielding for 20 at silver. I imagine it probably goes 20, 40, 60 is what I would think in terms of scaling. I don't know that for sure, but that's just what I would guess. So I don't love that on an 8-second cooldown, but we can think about bad blocker also in terms of working with our 28-hour fitness, where if we do have multicast with our 28-hour fitness, we are putting some good damage on our board. Let's just say 28-hour fitness and like a board full of other, I guess, small. They probably have to be medium, but let's just hope that they were small items that had over 10 value. That would be fixer upper, or rather the 28-hour fitness. That's one space, or that's 3 spaces. We have 7 other items on the board, so 8 spaces. This could potentially have a, this is for plus each item you have, so you could potentially have this like plus 8 multicast bad blocker, which would be 8 seconds. Every 8 seconds you put 80 damage on all your weapons. That's pretty good, but that's kind of the dream scenario. Again, getting your small items to above that 10 value mark is pretty difficult. But let's keep moving on the items here. So the next one here is Coin Cure. It says, every 7 seconds you gain regen for the fight equal to 1 times this item's value, and when you win a fight with it, you increase this item's value by 3, and it has that clause that says when you lose a fight with it, you permanently destroy this, but, very notably, here's a big but, you gain gold equal to its value. So even though it would die in the fight, you still are going to be gaining the value from it. So it's not as bad as like when your stained glass window dies, or when your crystal bonsai dies. I can look at that with like crystal bonsai. It says when you lose a fight, permanently destroy this. That never feels good. You just lost all that value, so you never really feel comfortable taking it into a PvP fight. So this new coin cure item makes you feel a little bit better about it. It's not one that you're gonna ideally want to value stack, but at the same time, if you have nothing else going on, then putting some value on this coin cure is not going to be a bad thing, because you know that you're always going to be getting the value back from it. And if I was to take a guess here, and again it is a guess, I would imagine that this clause here, gain regen for the fight equal to 1 times this item's value, that if you leveled this up, I imagine it gains, 2 times this item's value, 4 times this item's value, maybe even at diamond, but we'll see. I don't know that for sure. That might have been said in the Kriparian video, but I do not know for sure, and I highly encourage you to watch his take on it. But yeah, I think the coin cure in a vacuum is fine. I don't think it's a bad item. 7 seconds to gain regeneration is something that I don't like, but I'm not really looking at it for that clause. I'm looking at it more for this value stacking clause right here. And if you're just putting it on board and you get this early, this could be a nice little bank that you have, especially going into your, day 5, 6, or whatever, that you're trying to really pivot off of the builds in the early game and find something a little more impactful. So I don't hate this item. I think it's something that I'm not really looking at something that's going to be permanent on my board, but I could also see it potentially having some interesting enchant effects if you did want to go that route. Like I imagine if you put fiery, if you put poison onto it, that it's also going to put an insane amount of poison onto your opponent if you have this at a higher tier. But let's move on. Let's talk about the other items here. And I forgot to mention this, but this is a Mobalytics article here. I really appreciate Mobalytics and the information that they're putting out on the Bazaar. They have great guides and they have a lot of great information. It's one of the tools I utilize to stay kind of on top of what's happening in the Bazaar, but also love working. Well, I don't work with any content creators besides myself, but just seeing what other content creators are doing, I try and keep up with them as well. Anyway, next item here is Pen FT. So this is a pretty interesting, and I think it's going to be a pretty strong item too. It has a 2-second cooldown, which is pretty nuts. It's a small item. It says your items gain +3 value for the fight. That's pretty wild. That, again, when we're talking about something like the bad blocker that cares about your items having a higher value, that synergizes really well with Pen FT. Pen FT, by the time that bad blocker has gone off, would have already gone off 4 times. So your items would have already been above that 10 gold threshold, guaranteed if you have this on the board. And I imagine that at higher tiers, this is going to scale even more. I have no idea what it's going to scale into, but if it was something like 3, 6, 9, 12 that you're going to get, that meaning you're going to get 6 value on your items, 9 value, 12 value, I think that would be very good. I also think about this awkward thing that happens in your Pygmalion builds is where you see so many items that are good for value stacking, but you don't have the means to value stack it, or you don't have the income to do so. Value stacking items takes a lot of resources to get going. And when I say value stacking, I mean we're literally putting value onto our items. I have a whole Pygmalion video about every build on Pygmalion and how to do it. You can look at that, about how to go about that and that verbiage there. But again, it's kind of hard in the early and mid game to even want to put these potentially powerful items onto your board because you just don't have the build and economy set up to make them powerful. Or even I can think about something like, let's say, a Kilos. You maybe find this in your shop, you find like a silver tier Kilos. Awesome. It's day 4, you find this item, you want to pivot in the build, but you are going to have to sacrifice something to put this on the board or put it into your bag. And to do that, doesn't feel good. But with the item again, this Pen FT, this is where you could play the Pen FT on board, and then suddenly your QoS doesn't look that bad when it's going on the battlefield. Your QoS doesn't need to do 500 burn damage. It can still do, 20, 30 burn damage in the early to mid game. That could be enough, especially with some of the regenerative and shielding builds that Pygmalion has to offer. So ultimately, I do think that this Pen FT item is really strong and one that's going to be a cornerstone of a lot of the builds with Pygmalion moving forward. Not something you want in the late game, but something that'll kind of help bridge the gap. And that's really the type of item that I think Pygmalion has needed, is something to help him out in the early and mid game, just to make his items a lot less awkward when we're kind of getting them off the ground. A lot of what you have to do in the early and mid game with Pygmalion is, if you are value stacking, that is be comfortable losing fights, and then just know that you're going to get there in the end game. So this will help make sure that that happens less and less, and you can play more viable builds. And then the last item here that we have spoiled for us is the Wrist Warrior. So 5-second cooldown, small item. It says adjacent items gain +5 shield for the fight. And then it says when the item to the left of this shields do 5 damage. This is one that I'm not sure on just yet on its power. I think it has the potential to be very good. Again, there's a lot of small Pygmalion items and just Pygmalion items in general that shield that don't really do a ton outside of that, or don't have like a ton of value on them. Again, I always think of jewelry. This item I dislike playing and I dislike seeing, but sometimes you just have to play it because it is a 4-second shielding item on your board that you can have, or it's just something that you want to use with your matchbox. So Wrist Warrior can make those items viable. It can turn your shielding builds into something more viable. I like this as well because currently in the meta, shield builds feel really bad. And the reason is you can't really survive the poison builds from Mak. You can't survive the poison builds from Vanessa. They always kind of countered your shield builds regardless. But you have these two natural predators in the meta that are generally running a lot of poisoning. So your shield is not going to matter too much unless you have a way to convert that into damage. But even then, in the early game, you're probably not putting on that much shielding to begin with. Um, all of that being said, this allows you to be proactive with your reactive items. So again, if we look at jewelry, it's only shielding. So now Wrist Warrior means that it's going to be doing damage on top of that, which is something that I think kind of helps ease a little bit of that tension on Pygmalion, where you can't just be reactive on Pygmalion. You can't just be trying to heal and have defenses to win your fights. Don't get me wrong, there's certainly some really powerful builds that can go so over the top that it's viable, but generally speaking, you need to be doing something proactive when you're facing these high damage boards from your opponents. So I do like this Wrist Warrior in that capacity. It's the numbers that I'm not too impressed by. Giving 5 shielding to your adjacent items, that's nice, but it's really this damage clause that I'd be looking at down here that would determine if this item was pretty good. And doing 5 damage, I don't know that that's going to be enough. We'll have to see how things shake out, but my initial impression is that this is not going to be super powerful, but it's going to be another one of those Pygmalion items that kind of helps ease the tension in your early game when you have all these kind of like do nothing items to help you get into that stronger mid game. So I do like this. Also, notably, it is a tool and apparel, which is kind of nice when we're looking at, again, like the Beast of Burden builds and your cargo shorts and stuff like that. So I don't think it's bad, but I don't think it's great either. I'm kind of like I think it's going to land at being like a 3 out of 10 power level kind of item, but we'll see how that all shakes out. And yeah, those are the items that have been spoiled thus far from Pygmalion. These have been spoiled, at least in this article, on May 2nd. Again, I'll link down to Kriparian's video so you can see his takes on it. And I appreciate, I guess he works with Mobilytics. Unsure about that actually, but they have taken his reveals and put them out to the world to see. So I think that these are all nice additions to the Pygmalion lineup of items. I imagine just with how other expansions have gone in the past that we're going to see a couple more items spoiled. I don't imagine that we're only going to get these 5. I have to imagine that's going to be another 5. Don't know that for sure, but I just have looking at how literally all the other expansions have been, we get around that 10 items per character in their expansion. So I think that this half of it looks pretty decent right now. We'll see how the bad blocker works out, but I think all these other items make sense to some degree, and yeah, overall excited to see how they work out. And here is the expansion that I know statistically more of you have been waiting for, which is the Mak expansion, where we have seen, I think it is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, yeah, 10 new items spoiled for Mak here. So let's just dive right into them. They have this really interesting theme that we'll see, which is that they are poisoning you. So here's Adrenal Converter. It's a medium item. Every 6 seconds, you're poisoning both players for 5 seconds. It has a very interesting clause here. It says, when you poison yourself, gain 10 regeneration for the fight. And you haste an item for 2 seconds. So that clause is independent from the cooldown. So anytime you poison, you're going to get that effect. It instantly reminds me of something like the Ouroboros statue, which has a similar tag when it says, when you poison, you gain 10 6 or 2 6 to 10 regen for the fight. Notably, the Ouroboros statue at Diamond, you gain that 10 regeneration versus the Adrenal Converter, which looks to be at Silver, you gain that 10 regeneration. So it's already way more powerful than the Ouroboros statue in that sense, but the trigger for it is when you poison yourself. So you're going to have to do that, and we're going to see that there's going to be a couple more items that enable the synergy here. My first take on it is that poisoning yourself on Mak feels really bad because you have the lowest starting max HP pool in the game. So poisoning yourself and doing any damage to yourself on Mak doesn't feel very good. However, that just means that we're going to have to offset that through other means, whether that's prioritizing getting chocolates or trying to find other ways to boost our maximum HP. The other piece here is that regeneration does effectively negate poison. So when we're poisoning ourselves, we put 5 poison on us, but we also are putting 10 regen on us. Poison and regen tick at the same time every 1 second. So basically, if we had 5 poison on us and 10 regeneration, we would actually be gaining 5 life every 10 seconds. So something to keep in mind there. Also, this is from Spoiled on Snazer's stream. I don't know if he goes by BA Snazer, but I believe it's just Snazer, who I think is the like #2 ranked Bazaar player in the world. So they're obviously very, very, very good at the game. And yeah, I will put a link down to their stream where they spoiled these items, and I can go and hear their takes on it. But let's keep going here. So the next item is Barbed Claws, which says, small item, every 5 seconds, you're going to deal 5 damage. However, it has +1 multicast for each player with poison. So we're instantly again seeing this poisoning yourself theme being very good. You're incidentally sometimes going to be poisoned by your opponent, so this could have that +1 multicast. If you're Mak, you have a lot of items to enable poison. And again, with this item expansion here, we're seeing items that kind of do this right away, where they're going to poison both your opponent and yourself, which I think is very interesting. Having it be such a low damage item is, not the best, but there are certainly ways to raise damage in the game. Also, just even thinking about Mak, we could see something like Staff of the Moose and having a lot of regeneration, which could work well with this item. Having a +3 multicast weapon at a 5-second cooldown, I think, is very strong in general. Just having 3 attacks every 5 seconds, having that proc of attacking for 3 attacks every 5 seconds is just very good, because there's so many ways that we can abuse that and stack damage onto it. So overall, I think that the Barb Claws is looking pretty strong. I know that 5 damage seems pretty innocuous, but there are a lot of ways for which we can raise that damage, and there's also some cool synergies that we can utilize with that, thinking about something like a poppy field where we're attacking 3 times, so we're poisoning them 3 times, and that could proc something like our spider mace, which we can see here. Our spider mace, every time you slow or poison, charges 2 seconds. Also, just thinking about if we are using the Barbed Claws and we enchant it, because it starts at bronze tier, there's a lot of opportunities to get this as an enchanted item. If we can enable this with slow or poison or so many other properties, that can be really good for Mak. So I think that the Barbed Claws are looking pretty good here. Let's keep going though and look at this other item here, fungal spores. So another small bronze item that, starting at bronze, looks to do every 4 seconds your poison items gain +2 poison for the fight. Okay, this one's pretty interesting. Notably, it itself does not poison, as we can see here, but it's going to give poison to your other items. So the kind of analog to this, I would think, is something like the Emerald, which is also starting at bronze. It itself poisons, and then every 7 seconds it poisons, but it says your other poison items gain +3, 4, 5, 6 poison. Emerald is good. Generally, I like to be on burn builds on Mak more than poison builds. However, having the opportunity to keep stacking the poison onto your poison items, I think, is very strong. There's also just so many little small poison items on Mak in ways to poison, being small and medium, that having an item like the fungal spores, which is going to keep putting poison onto your items, I think is going to be pretty crazy. Also, having a 4-second cooldown, it's going to be going off more, or I guess I should say sooner and more often than a lot of the other poison items on Mak. So I can think of something maybe like I figured out how to spell it, the Aludel, which is every 7 seconds we're poisoning and it has multicast. We can also look at something like the Retort, which is going off every 6 seconds. So generally speaking, these aren't the only poison items on Mak, but two of the big ones. You're going to have the fungal spores having gone off already before your poison item goes off. So if we compare that again to something like the Emerald is adding 4 poison at silver tier inherently. Um, and if we're thinking about kind of like static ability versus an active ability, so we are going to put on 2 poison then we hit that 8-second mark. After the 8-second mark, it's good as your silver tier emerald, but then from there, every time that this is going to go off subsequently, it's going to gain way more and more value comparative to that emerald. So it's just less poison up front. However, even in conjunction with something like an emerald, I think that this could be super strong. Overall, I just think that the fungal spores is looking really good. It's such a low tier investment for such a high power item. Thinking about this item at bronze, this is good to just have on your board regardless. There is this kind of strange spot that you can get in with Mak where you don't really care about the nature of the items that you have on board, just as long as they're kind of facilitating the synergy that you have, whether that's slowing, whether that's burning, or whether that's poisoning, or maybe even doing damage. It's like the synergy that you have is just so powerful on like the 1 or 2 synergy items that care about the specific synergy. Thinking of even again like Staff of the Moose, which cares about having a lot of regeneration, and if you can get a bunch of regeneration, then having the Staff on the Moose on the board is insane. That's a lot of Mak builds where you just have one like very powerful synergy based item, and then you just put a bunch of other items next to it that can help facilitate that synergy. And fungal spores just works with that sort of playstyle so nicely. So yeah, I think that this item is very powerful. And let's move on to another item here, the infused bracers. So this is another poisoning both players item. It is a medium item. It also has a static clause where it says, when you poison yourself, your weapons gain plus damage for the fight equal to 1 times this item, or the amount poisoned, and the weapon to the left of this has lifesteal. I think that that last clause there, the weapon to the left of this has lifesteal, is super, super, super important on when evaluating this. Also, when you're poisoning yourself, that clause comes up a couple times on the items like we've already seen. Harder to enable overall. However, if you're giving lifesteal to your items, there's only, I think, 2 other ways to do that on Mak, where you're looking at the mortar and pestle, which gives the item to the right of this lifesteal, and then we can think about the runic potion, which gives another weapon lifesteal for the fight. So we have a 3rd item here, potentially 4th. I can't think of a 3rd one though. Another item here that's going to do that, which is just a very powerful effect in general into the game. But also it's buffing the damage onto your board. So I look at this like a mortar and pestle where you have this damage buffing item that's also giving lifesteal. But the thing about the infused bracers is that it has that static clause again of when you poison yourself, your weapons gain damage equal to that poison that you're putting onto yourself. So if you can get this with a lot of other self-poisoning enablers, you're going to be doing a lot more scaling compared to your mortar and pestle. So I really think the infused bracers are a nice upgrade. It looks like it's going to be starting at gold. Unsure about that in the long run here, as I don't have full information, but just based off how the other items have been spoiled to us, I assume that this is starting at gold tier. And if that is the case, this item is going to be harder to find, but generally a very potent one. And one that, again, you may not even care about this damage buffing aspect of poisoning both players and then buffing your damage. You might just only care about this lifesteal. So having another one of these items in the game I think is very good, especially if you're Mak and you have a low starting max HP pool. You're going to want every ounce of lifesteal if you're going to be poisoning yourself. So I think that the infused bracers are looking pretty good. And now let's look at the optical augment. So this is a nice one here because it's going to jumpstart that self-poisoning synergy. It says at the start of each fight, poison yourself for 4. And then it says the item to the left of this has critical chance equal to your poison. So this is interestingly seeing the total amount of poison that is on you. So once you have 100 poison on you, you are going to have 100 crit chance on the item to the left. So that synergizes really well with all of the crit chance items. Thinking about something like the magic carpet, which has its cooldown reduced whenever you crit with an item, or even thinking about something like the, I think it's a runic sword, is it not? Okay, maybe not that. Ah, it's the runic blade. I was so close. Runic sword, runic blade. Either way, another item that cares about when you crit, you are going to give it more damage. So having that another item that enables the crit synergy builds, I think is really good on Mac. In my opinion, I thought the crit synergy build on Mac was good, but it was also inconsistent in that there wasn't enough consistency of items that were really enabling that crit chance to make it feel like you could go for it on all of your runs. Mind you, you're not going to be able to go for whatever build you want on all of your runs regardless, but it just felt like the crit chance build itself, getting like the high tier powered item version of it, was something that you couldn't consistently do just because Runic Blade, I think, is like the best item that you can get for that crit chance synergy build, and getting a magic carpet is not bad, but ultimately I don't think that this item scales super well into the late game just with how I've played it. Mind you, that's just my opinion. I'm certain other people feel differently about it, but still, getting crit chance is good. But yeah, starting off the fight poisoning yourself, this feels risky. And again, if you don't have any way to like survive in the early game, if you don't have lifesteal, if you don't have regeneration to make up for that poison, thinking about like day 1 through 5 or day 1 through 4 even, it's not going to feel that good. But it can again kickstart that synergy where if you're poisoning yourself, do X, where we've seen in these other items with infused bracers, that means that you're giving your more damage onto your board. Or if we're looking at something like the adrenal converter, we're getting regeneration. Generally speaking, just because of the rarities of these items, you're going to see barbed claws and the optical augment together more often, just because they're both small bronze items, so they're pretty easy to find early. And with that, I mean, that is not bad. You're kickstarting this having poison on you, so the Barb Claws is going to inherently kind of have that +2 multicast, and then finding another poison item from there is pretty trivial. So yeah, I think that overall the optical augment, it could be pretty good. It definitely takes some building around, and I don't think that's a bad thing, but the main thing that I really like about it is it's kind of enabling two different builds here, and even synergize as well in the poison builds. So I think this item is looking pretty good, and one that I think will be a great addition to the Mac pool. Now let's look at another item here, the Peace Rot. So every 7 seconds, we're gaining 2 regen for the fight. It's a medium item. It has something very weird about it. It says, when you visit a merchant, permanently destroy the weapon to the left of this item to increase this item's regeneration by that item's value. Or wait, it says by its value. So let's read that again. When you visit a merchant, permanently destroy the weapon to the left of this to increase that item's regeneration. This item's regeneration by its value. Interesting. So I think what this is saying is that, let's say we go to the shop, we have a fang next to the Peace Rot, we destroy the fang, then our Peace Rot is going to go up to 4. And then, let's say we get another small weapon, we go to another shop, we destroy it. I believe what this is saying is that that 4 will then go up to 8. I think that's the case. If that is the case, the Peace Rock could get out of control. The problem I'm seeing with it is that it's a 7-second cooldown item that takes a lot of enabling. I'm wondering that if it'll have a lower cooldown when we level it up. If that is the case, I think this could be very strong. The thing about it though is that we're not getting any value from destroying a weapon. So we're kind of losing the gold that we invested into it and putting that value onto the Peace Rot. If it is the other situation where it is basically saying like, if you have, again, let's use the example of a fang where it's a bronze fang, you're going to sell it for 1. If it's instead this means that when you destroy the Peace Rot, you take the value from the item it destroyed, so you'd just be adding 1 to this. I think that that's going to be a lot worse, just because I think that's going to be way harder to scale. And On Mac, you're not always incentivized to go to shops like this. I'm thinking about comparing it to like a Pygmalion who has a lot of items where going to merchants makes a lot of sense, like a rewards card or something like that. And the piece rot also requires you to buy that weapon or to get that weapon somehow and then basically destroy it. And you're probably not going to want to put the value, or you're not going to want to sell this piece rot realistically, but you might have to. So, the piece rot could be kind of like a value play in some ways, which, on Mac, we don't have a lot of those outside of kind of the whole transmuting of our reagents. So, this could be another value play item here. Something that's going to gain a lot of value, and then we kind of have like a living bank on our board that will then sell at some point. That could be good. I think that this item's gonna, just on its face, take a lot of work to get off the ground. But if you get it off the ground, I think that it could be pretty insane. And the reason I say that is because I compare it to an item like Satchel, which says when you buy a potion, increase this item's regeneration by 2, 4, or 6. And we've seen Satchel be pretty decent. If you can put that amount of regeneration on it, you also have a lot of opportunities to buy potions on Mac. So I think that the satchel is like a very real item for the purposes of value stacking regeneration. And again, if we can ever put these items next to the Staff of the Moose, which says your weapons have plus damage equal to your regeneration, I think that this item, or that this item rather, the Peace Rot, could be very powerful. It really depends a lot on how this value interaction is going to work. And yeah, I'm curious on how that scales. I think this can be strong, but time will tell. Let's keep moving here and see what other items there are. Now here's the rapid injection system. It says medium item. It has no cooldown, so these are all static abilities. The first one says when you poison yourself, poison 4. Okay. The next one says when you use an adjacent item, poison yourself for 4 and gain 2 regeneration for the fight. Interesting. Okay. So another item that is kind of like offsetting that self-poisoning by giving you regeneration. This one is not fully doing that in that it's giving you 4 poison and it's only giving you 2 regeneration in turn, so it's kind of doing 2 damage to you every second, kind of like doing 2 poison to you every second, we should just say. That is a really interesting clause though. That says when you use an adjacent item, poison yourself. So basically whenever you use an adjacent item, you're also poisoning your opponent. So you can kind of combine these two. When you use an adjacent item, poison you and your opponent for 4. If we're reading it like that, this can be very powerful. I again think of something like Spider Mace, which makes a lot of sense, not necessarily next to this item, unless we have a way to Kickstarter Spider Maces, and then that's very good. Yeah, it could be good next to it now that I think about it more, but regardless, I think that if we can get some low cooldown items next to this, it could be very potent. The fact that it's not fully making up for the damage that it's dealing you makes it a little risky, and effectively you are putting out double the damage onto your opponent than you're putting onto yourself. But again, Mac doesn't have a lot of max HP, so we are probably at a deficit of HP compared to our opponents to begin with, so that's still pretty risky. I think that this is going to be strong. That's my number one take on it. The second piece to it is that I think it has a very serious downside in that self-poisoning, just because if you are putting items next to this to poison your opponent, you're going to be wanting to put low cooldown items that are going off very quickly. And if that's the case, you're trying to maximize your DPS, you're trying to put on the most damage possible on your opponent. That inadvertently is also going to hurt you. And that can be kind of tough on Max. So if you're maybe like, again, a proactive poppy field build, pull up the poppy field, which says your weapons have plus damage equal to the percentage of poison on your enemy. And when you use a weapon you poison, like that would be really good. The problem with the poppy field build and this item is that they're kind of doing something similar. in that they're poisoning our opponent whenever we are using a weapon, and I don't think you'd really want to use a poppy field and this rapid injection system on the same board, because then you would only have 5 slots for weapons, and I think you kind of want to maximize weapons when you have your poppy field, but you could certainly run all those items. I could see that working. It's just thinking about the most powerful version of this item. Again, I think it's going to be strong. I am interested to see how it kind of shakes out. I think just converting your items next to it into poison damage dealers is very good, and it also synergizes super well with a lot of these other poison, self-poisoning items that we've seen. So I think it could be good, even thinking about like the infused bracer specifically. And if we have some low cooldown weapons, then I do like this item more. But yeah, overall, I think it is powerful. It's just, you're gonna have to think twice on how this item plays into your board and how much damage you're doing yourself. But let's keep moving here. So this is kind of one of the big crux items, I would say, of this build here, from Retromation, who spoiled it, a great YouTuber. I really love his positivity. All that said, let's look at the test subject alpha. I'll link to his video below so you can see his take on it too. So it's a large weapon friend, 11-second cooldown, and it says deal 50 damage every 11 seconds. It also has 2 static clauses. It says, when you use an adjacent item, poison both players for 10. It also says, when you poison, this gains plus damage for the fight equal to the amount poisoned. So a little bit of risk, a little bit of reward here. Seeing that it has an 11-second cooldown, I do not know, but I imagine what this means is that when you level it up, it is going to have a lower second or lower cooldown. The reason I think that is just because we see that for like the goop flail. The goop flail is something similar. I don't think the staff of the moose just has a slower cooldown. No, it doesn't. So, maybe that isn't the case. We'll see. If that is the case where it's going off sooner, I think that this item is way more effective. Just seeing that this goes off every 11 seconds is not ideal. On Mac, you do have this problem with the character where if you're a slower build, in which a lot of Mac builds are, you do just get bursted out of the game by something like Weapons Vanessa or a dually who goes off quicker than you. So looking at test subject alpha, that clause of dealing damage every 11 seconds is not very fast. So finding a way to lower the cooldown of this, haste it, charge it, that's all things you can do on Mac, but it's just another item that you would need to enable this. That feels risky. The also other piece of this is when you use an adjacent item, poison both players for 10. Man, this also has no way of really reducing that downside, and 10 poison is way more than 4 poison where we looked at with that injector. 10 poison is very real. Again, I would imagine if you're trying to capitalize off of that clause, you're trying to maximize your DPS, thus you're putting very fast items next to this, so it gets really risky. If that's the case, you're putting fast items next to the test subject alpha, you also aren't putting any items next to it that are going to charge it or haste it. Thinking about something like smelling salts, which requires being adjacent to the item to haste it. Even thinking of something like hourglass, which again talks about adjacent items. This test subject alpha is incentivizing you to put items that are actively going off and have a cooldown next to this item, so you're not putting cooldown reduction next to it. It's basically, to me, saying when this goes off, you have to kill your opponent. And if it doesn't, you're probably not going to get to 22 seconds to get it to go off again, just because you've put on probably a tremendous amount of poison onto yourself to get it to that point. Notably, it doesn't care about adjacent items for its damage clause. The damage clause just says when you poison, this gains damage for the fight equal to the amount poisoned. So you don't have to do any self-poisoning with test subject alpha to make it good. You may, honestly, that might be the way to go, where you have cooldown reduction items next to test subject alpha, and then you have a bunch of other poison items on your board that would help facilitate it growing bigger. My initial impression is that it's not an item that I think is super strong unless the self-poisoning synergy and the kind of poisoning your opponent with fast items part of this is very good. The damage dealing part of it is just too slow for me in like the mid to late game where you would realistically be playing this on your board. Playing this on your board early can also be risky rather, so I don't love this item, but overall I do think that it can be strong. I mean, we've definitely seen innocuous looking items do crazy things, but my initial take here is that it is not super crazy for winning, but it can probably have some obscene numbers. But I could certainly be wrong, and we shall see. But yeah, now we have two more items here. The second to last here is Venomous Dose, which says every 4 seconds, it's a small item. You poison both players for 2, so we see that synergy again. And then also tied to that cooldown, it says gain regeneration for the fight equal to this item's poison. So it is directly negating the poison that it's doing. So for every 2 that you put on yourself, you're also putting 2 regen. So you're not actively hurting yourself when you have this item on your board. I do like the fact that it's giving you regeneration. 2 regeneration is not a bad thing at every 4 seconds in the early game. Poisoning both players for 2, and putting 2 poison on your opponent for a bronze tier item. That's not great. I think of like something like the Venomander, which is doing something very similar and having very slow poison or very low poison numbers. But if you are really caring about this poison both player synergy, where we can look at the Barbed Claws, which cares exactly about that, and the Barbed Claws is going off at every 5 seconds, so if we had the Venomous Dose, this is going off right before it, so we're guaranteeing that we're going to be having our Barbed Claws going off with a 3 times multicast. I think in that context, this item is very good. I would not want to really be playing this item outside of that. Again, if you don't have something that really synergizes with that poison both players type of build, then it's just like another one of the Mak items that is trying to enable your larger poison synergy where you don't really care what it is, you just care that it says poison. So yeah, I think that this item in the right build is insane. Um, just gets you off the ground, starts proccing your your poison both player synergies, but on its own doesn't do a whole lot. Yeah, I think it's good, just not super impressive, I guess is the ultimate thing. It is kind of like probably going to be the necessary glue that you need, especially in the early game, to make like your Barb Claws work, and something that's going to work really well next to your Adrenal Converter, or that's also going to work well with your Infused Bracers, that sort of stuff. So I think it's a pretty decent item there. And then last and maybe least is the Wild Quillback. So this is a pretty wild item. No pun intended, genuinely. Uh, it says a medium item, no cooldown, so 2 static effects on it. It says when a player uses a weapon, poison that player for 3. And then it also says when a player uses a non-weapon, that player gains 3 regeneration for the fight. Well, that first clause I don't like. That second clause is really strong. I think about that second clause though, and think that if we're going into regeneration build, again, we're probably going into Staff of the Moose territory. There is also the ring item here, which I can find it, the Soul Ring, which poisons equal to your regeneration. So if you had it with Soul Ring next to it, that works really well, because your Soul Ring cares about regeneration. I think that you can't put this in every build, but the more I read it, the more I'm coming around to it. Um, I think when I first read it, I kind of viewed it as like the beehive, which basically cared about your opponent's the beehive. There you go. Yeah, the beehive, which says when your enemy uses a weapon, charge your busy bees, and you kind of had like this whole bees build, which was okay on Pygmalion, but again, if you just found an opponent who was playing non-weapons, your build was very ineffective. But this is kind of like incidental hate towards weapon builds, which is kind of nice. You're not probably going to want to run it in your own weapons builds unless you really care about that self-poisoning. I'm thinking again about the infused bracers. That would make a lot of sense where you have a bunch of weapons, you have your infused bracers, and then you have the wild quillback, so you're like really stacking a lot of damage on your weapons. But again, it's kind of risky because poisoning yourself is not good. um, but this clause down here I think is very powerful, that whenever a player uses a non-weapon item, that player gains 3 regeneration for the fight. I think that's very good. The problem again is that it is also symmetrical. So both players are gaining that regeneration. Generally on Mak, I think that you're going to be able to capitalize off that way more than your opponents are, just because of, again, items like that soul ring that we're looking at, like the staff of the moose. Um, yeah, we have looked at those items. I think, again, yeah, you're going to be capitalizing way more off of these triggers here, but it still is not all upside for you. And in a game where getting chocolates for like even 50 max HP is sometimes win or lose in fights, and more often than not is in the early games, this could be a really big downside. I think that it could be insane. I think that there's some really like powerful synergy high roll builds that Wild Coolback is going to be absolutely absurd in, but I think that you're going to really need to think about how your board is playing for your to be maximizing off of this item. Also, notably, it is a friend, so for the Tiny Furry Monster event, you're going to want a friend, and this is another one for that, which Mak can sometimes have a hard time getting the necessary items to gain that 1 XP. So, yeah, I think that the Wild Quillback can be good. It falls again to another category of we're going to have to wait and see how the build and the numbers all stack together, but my initial take is a little bit low on it just because I don't like anything to be benefiting my opponents, and this has 2 clauses that inherently are going to be potentially benefiting our opponents if we don't play our board correctly. So yeah, I think that this will be good, but it'll be good in the right build, not every build. So you just have to be careful on how you build it. And with that, that's 10 items, y'all. I'm very excited. I think we're probably going to see another 5 for Pygmalion. I assume, I don't know for sure, but I assume. Regardless, I think that the new Mak items are looking very fun. I think that they all work really well together, and they have some applications outside of this new expansion build, which feels really nice when the items that are coming in synergize with other items pretty decently. And I think there's some really interesting build arounds and ones that are just going to be fun to play with, like the Peace Rot. Just like enabling this item could be really cool, and when you get it working, it's going to feel really good. Also, the other Pygmalion items that we looked at, I think were pretty cool, and excited for those. But yeah, ultimately, pretty excited for season 2 here. We'll see what other changes they make to the new items. I imagine they're going to be addressing the Shark Claws weapons Vanessa builds that are way too fast just because of how many people complain about it, myself included. If they don't, then hey, we'll see what else that they change in season 2 to maybe address that. Regardless, really excited to also hear what you guys think. We can always talk about engagement in the comments and things of that nature, but I truthfully just want to know what you guys think of this item. I'm here on my YouTube screen in a vacuum, so hearing your thoughts and feedback on these items would be pretty cool, just to see what synergies I'm missing. So yeah, all that said, I am the Bazaar Whisperer. I appreciate you joining me here, and I'll see you in the next one.